Great. Thank you and welcome everybody. I wanted to start in the most important place in the garden. For me, I'm just going to dive right into the content, and I do encourage you to ask questions along the way. Belinda and Camille, if it seems like I'm missing the chat and not seeing it, feel free to chime in, and we'll keep some of this interactive as we go here. So I've been gardening for a long time now, and I've been in this garden for about 10 years, just so you have the context when you see things. We'll go through a little bit of the background and some key pieces, wind up over by the vegetables and give some specific tips, and then I've got a couple of books and resources as a last piece as we continue the Q&A. So that said, most important part of the garden here is the compost. So I have a 2-bin compost, but for the raw fruits and vegetable food scraps that I have, I actually put it in a contained little system like this. You can see there's some paper too, and you know, composting will have to be another whole workshop, but I do this. I aerate regularly. I've got this little aerator on the side here that I pick up and I put in every time I add my greens and browns and make sure it's moist enough. And it's just my way of reinforcing how important it is to have healthy soil in your garden. When you have healthy soil, you have the foundation and you have the nutrients that uptake into the plants the way you need them. The other key thing that I want to emphasize is having, let me flip it around here, is having things that flower and having perennials that come back, especially the edible foods. So, so here I am in the corner here and just kind of looking, you can see everything starting to blow up. We'll go over and look at the chickens on the left. We'll look at the vegetable beds that are down the way. But I'll start here with a couple of the perennials. So the neighbor's grape comes over and we share the grapes depending on which direction they're going. Here you can see the fig leaves, and a fig tree is coming up here. And then I've got a structure here for some raspberries. And you can see in the close-up that they're just starting to go. And I do get varieties where they just keep coming up over the whole summer. I've got some that are, you know, late season as well, just so I spread out the harvest. And then I look for opportunities always, right? Like down here, these are coming up. They don't get to stay here. They're going to crowd everything out. I'll pull those up, offer them to a friend, put them on a no-buy site, or move them in where the other ones are. So I'm always looking at how I can move things along. I also I plant seeds. I'll throw seeds down in different places, or like these are growing, so I'll just let them grow. Other things like this is a artichoke sunflower. This comes up from the ground. It grows to 6 feet and has yellow flowers all over it. So I do things to make it easy, because summer's a busy time, right? I'm not out here all the time, but I do the prep work ahead. So then here on the perennial side, I've got a kiwi. This is actually one of those mistakes though, where I've got a male and female kiwi, but one's more in the shade, so I can't get them to flower together. So I might actually move that someday. You can also see the sour cherries that are coming in. So even if you have a small place in the garden, a small garden space, it's still good to find a way to have, you know, even to plant a little bit of lavender or some sage, or, you know, put some flowering, reseeding. These are type plants in so that you get flowers across the season. That's great for the pollinators, right? So I've got that here. And then we'll go into the vegetable beds. But first, let's say hi to the chickens. Everybody doing okay so far? I see one chat thing came up here.
Yep, all is good. Yeah,
all
let's
good.
meet the chickens. What are their names?
Okay, let me get the speaker back on here. So these are the girls. They came to us a few days old, mid-April, and after about 4 or 5 weeks, they don't love living inside anymore, and we're happy to have them live outside. Oh, good, I can see the chat. Use soft eyes. The city bylaw says that you can have 6 and they must be all female. You need to have a place for them to roost, and you need to have a covered run. If for City of Vancouver, different towns have different things. So the black ones are, oh my goodness, I'll have to look them up after. It's escaping, but they lay dark chocolate colored eggs. The white ones are going to lay sort of regular beige eggs, and then the leghorns here, these light brown ones, have some Araucana, and they lay blue-green eggs. So they're pretty happy here. And then I've got water and feed, and really they take a little less energy than a cat and a little more energy than a house plant, is kind of how I describe it. So I've got to run in here, and then they go in here to roost at night. They've got a dowel, and they've got a little nest so that you can reach up from the outside to get the eggs. They won't lay for 5 or 6 weeks, and then they go down that little ladder. And apologies, I do need to clean out the coop, but they have excellent manure. Well, because they're not very efficient eaters, and so their digestive system leaves something to be desired, and they the manure is great for the compost. So any questions on chickens? Again, that could be a whole other workshop in and of itself, but if there's a quick one or two, I'm happy to address. Okay, we're good?
So far, so good.
All right, that's the girls. Another way to add efficiency in the garden is, this is a espalier fruit tree. So every year I cut this back. It's an apple tree. You can see there's a couple apples. Let me see. There's an apple, and I make it so that it's two-dimensional, so it stays lined up with the fence, and it's just another way to get more production. And then here I let some fennel grow. I only let it grow in one place because it can be a little bit invasive, so I just let it go here. And then underneath, I love the idea of layering whenever you can. So underneath this sour cherry tree, I've got some flowering items, and the sage and different kinds of flowers, some lavender, so that I've got as many I want to get as many pollinators into the garden as I can. In terms of the chicks, we got them when they were a few days old. We wanted to get them sexed so that they were so that we knew that they were female, and we wanted also, there's a couple vaccines that they do. In terms of perennials, you can see that I have a very kind neighbor who's let the grape vine go over into his yard, and so we picked this, including up on his balcony. He's fine because he gets a little bit of shade on his deck, and then I use a steam canner to make as much grape juice as possible, and then we have that canned and sitting there. You don't have to do a full canning process because it's pretty acidic. You just take it through, you steam it, it's very hot, and then I rinse the jars and put it right in. Other perennials over here, there's a quince tree that was given as a gift, and it creates this yellow fruit that has very high pectin. So we make jelly from it every year and share it with the neighbors. And then another one over here is an Asian pear, and it's got a couple different varieties. And again, it's that espalier, so it's the variety. It's the intent is to use the space well and not take up too much space. And then some catmint below. The only weed in your garden is something you don't want, and so I have lemon balm here. I put it under where the trampoline is, so that if kids step on it, it just smells good and it doesn't stress anyone out. And then I do mint also that comes back on its own every year underneath on the side here, and also in the back, so that it just covers the ground and just grows on its own, and is pretty happy in a mix of places. Again, I don't let these things go in my beds because I don't want them taking over in the beds. I've got some different vines over here, and then nasturtium you can see down here, back where I hide my recycling. So I'm trying to use every space in the garden. The nasturtium have orange and red flowers that are edible, so that's a nice thing to throw into salads. And then, let me look at my notes here. And then I really try, for the vegetables, try to adopt a style of bio-intensive gardening. So I'm looking at how to plant things in sequence so that I can get multiple harvests, how to use layering so that I get the most out of the area, rotating crops, there's a lot of info. You can even search online about different crops that pull different types of nutrients. So I move things around. I'll put tomatoes in a different place every year, and beans, things like that. And then I just there's a little bit that I plan and some that I leave to chance. And the other thing that's important on that front, just at a high level, is extending the growing season. So I have a cold frame here. You can see it's up. These sides do come down, and I cover it all winter. And then I get Swiss chard that you can see here, and you can see that it's starting to bolt or flower. And so I'll cut it down for a while, and now I'm just letting it go to seed, and I'll pull it out and I'll put some of the warmer crops. I'll try a cantaloupe and some eggplant and some hot peppers in the cold frame to take advantage of the cold frame in summer. One of the other first things that I do in the season is I'll put some salad greens and spinach, and then I just come out, and you can see where I've cut recently. I'll just cut these with scissors, and they bounce back, and I just keep cutting them for a while. And I start them in the cold frame because they do quite well. I'll even put like a piece of clear plastic that I can find on top, plus cover the cold frame, so that I create that optimal environment for the seeds to germinate even when it's a little cool. I will start some things inside as well. The other thing for the cold frame is just coming over to this side. There was some other Swiss chard, and there's nothing like getting fresh greens in like end of March and as things are starting to grow again. And then I'll put some flats of starts. You can see these are tomatoes, and for the local folks, I'm happy to pass along at least a couple starts to those who want to swing by it after the workshop, and I can put them on the front porch. But I'll do that. The one thing that you have to be careful about with contained spaces, though, is slugs, because they like these little spots. So I have to lift up the flats and look for them. You can use a yeast mix or a not too expensive beer, pour a little bit in a pan and catch the slugs that way. There's other things that you can buy that are non-toxic, but in terms of pest management, I try to keep a balance in the garden overall, so that some things just kind of solve themselves over time, rather than needing to go buy things. Sometimes on the pest front too, like with the Asian pear, when you get the new growth here, I'll get some aphids sometimes. I see that I do have them. I wasn't sure. And so the first thing I'll do is just rub them off, or spray them with a little bit of water. But if you can see there's some ants on there, the ants the aphids are helping to harvest what the ants want. But sometimes you'll start to see larvae for butterflies even that are eating the aphids. So I don't want anything to get too out of whack, but sometimes I'll leave things for a bit because it helps to complete a cycle. So I'm always kind of wandering around and checking things out. And you can see there's an Asian pear already. It's one of my favorites in the garden. And I'm already getting some bees on the catmint. It's a great one to have bees. You can also take 4x4s of cedar and drill 1/4-inch holes and have them around the side of your fence. And it's a way to have nesting for mason bees, which is another way just to bring more pollinators in. So this, at a first glance, looks a little messy, but there's a couple things going on, just to give an example here. So you can see from these long pieces that this is garlic coming up. Garlic tries to flower on you, and so you have to cut them off, cut the scapes off, and then you can saute them. Oh, here's one right here. Or too much energy will go up into the plant and not into the roots of the garlic. So that's one thing that's going on in this space. The other thing is that this, I think it's called tazumi, this little spicy salad, I threw some seeds down that I had because I wanted them to come up underneath the garlic, and they're doing exactly what I asked. It's just another way of making space, and then I'll harvest these when I need to stop watering the garlic and let it get ready to be harvested closer in July. And then I've also got some poppies here that reseed, and I don't let them come up everywhere, but I'll let them come up in bunches here and there because you get pretty flowers, and it just adds something else to the garden. The other thing I did over here is when there was absolutely nothing here, this was a collard down here that had overwintered, and it just had a couple leaves on it. And so I moved them from around the garden. I put them all in one place, and then I let them kind of grow and go to seed. But they flowered for a while first when I didn't have many other things flowering in the garden. So that was super handy. And then it allowed things to grow up underneath. Sometimes in terms of seed saving, there's a dynamic where things cross-pollinate. I'll just say hi here for a sec. And when they cross-pollinate, you'll get a Swiss chard, for example, but it'll look more like the top of a beet instead of having the bigger leaf structure because it's mixed with other things in the garden. Seed savers have to really isolate a lot of what they grow. There are some things like beans where you can grow and keep the seeds, but I don't tend to do a lot of seed saving, but there's networks that you can connect with for more of that. Sometimes if it happens and I get a bunch of things like with the lettuce here, I just dump this in the corner and then it kind of went nuts. And so I just come out with the scissors and trim it. In terms of garden beds, some of the other early things that I did is you can see this decorative kale here. I put it in and I put it in a pretty dense pattern. I turn the soil over just the top layer, spread out the seeds. Generally, you want to cover the seeds with about the width of the seed is the amount of cover. Now, something like kale seeds are very small, so maybe I'll cover a centimeter. And then sometimes I'll put a white cloth over top. It's called rime, again, when it's early in the season. So these came up, and now there's so many of them that I'm thinning them out as I go and also just cutting them with scissors. So that's another way I optimize. Next to it here, you can see some carrots. Actually, I'm gonna go over to the other side. Everybody's good so far? Throw something into the chat. Am I hitting the spots? Is there any questions? Again, I'm happy to answer them as we go.
No, so far.
We're good. All right, I'm just gonna keep ad-libbing here, and it's all gonna come out. But it was a great spring. Something about being at home even more than usual, and having all these other things go on made me a very diligent gardener in the beginning. So you can see on this side, the carrots came up really pretty nicely. They're still gonna take a while till I'm able to do a first harvest. In one area, they didn't come up as densely, so I did an extra sowing of seeds. Over here, I put some bamboo that I found on sale in as I planted the snow peas, and you can see the snow peas are just starting to flower, and I'm going to be inundated soon. I did snow peas and snap peas just to get some variety, and then I have to keep pulling them in towards the frame. I also keep tall pieces of bamboo if I need to put something in just to get something on track. I'll do that. Carrot seed saving is kind of a mixed bag, but sometimes I'll get a carrot like this that has survived and is starting to come up and flower, so I'll let one or two flower because they're good for the bees and critters in the garden, and sometimes I'll save the seeds and throw them in and see what happens. There's always, you want to always experiment and have a little bit of adventure. Along the line of the collards, these were a couple of bigger ones that I staked, and I had all kinds of leaves really early in the season, and now these are going to flower, so I'll take them out when I put my next round of bean, corns, tomatoes, some of the plants that you can't put in until the soil warms up a little more. In terms of succession planting, I put in radishes pretty early. So I've harvested a bunch of them. And then a few weeks later, I went over into the middle of the bed and I put another round in. So I'll be able to harvest these probably in the next few weeks. I also had some beans that I started inside early, and I put them near the radishes because the radishes are going to come out by the time the beans start to get bigger. I like to use pole beans when I can because then you can pull them up and you get another layer that way. Here I've got some parsnips that are growing. One thing too with the radishes is you can use a lot of the material, right? You get the radish out, you can actually make a radish leaf or radish top pesto. So when in doubt, Google, see what recipes are out there, and again, see how many parts of the plant that you can use. I've got some collards here. Again, I'll thin these out as I go so that I've got some that go into fall. some rapini. So I just come out and sometimes feel too busy to harvest, but I'll just do some of these just so that I get these when they're at that nice tender phase, and I'll get a handful and then go in and just do a quick saute. I don't know if you guys can see, but this little guy is just staying suspended mid-air. Anyway, there's always lots to observe, and it's just about coming out and spending time. And you can see there's different styles. I tend to garden in blocks. Back in this corner here, actually, I've got some asparagus that is going to, that I let come up. I don't pick it for the first few years. And then I had a different kind of bean I put here. And I've also got arugula because it reseeds on its own. And then my roommate, he's got some different things. And you can see he's got a slightly different style that also works. He's got beans. He's got some tomatoes. He's got a row of salad greens and carrots. He's got some of this cucumber in the back. He's using vertical space with some hanging plants. And again, it's very complementary as well. So many things. Yes, it's true. And again, it's evolved over time, right? If you're starting for the first time, there's a few things you can pick that you know are going to have good success and early harvest, like radish and some of the different greens, the brassica family, right? The cabbage and kale, some lettuce. The leafy greens are the things that we pay a lot for in the grocery store that are relatively easy to grow, and you just keep trimming, right? And then getting a tomato plant or two and trimming the leaves as you go, so you really get the most from your plant. It goes, instead of growing a lot of leaves, you know, you're thinning it out. It helps to avoid disease. Plus you're getting plus more energy goes into producing the actual fruit. The last thing from this part of the garden that I'll show is this year I was feeling ambitious, and you see it here, but this is, there's a ring here, and I did a potato, I used it to grow potatoes. Yes, I will address that. And so for potatoes, they do take some space, so I covered them with some straw and some compost every time they started to come up, and now I'm letting the top come up, and I pinch the flowers off, and in a few more weeks I should be able to start harvesting some potatoes. For what you can do on your patio, a lot of what I've shown you here, you can actually grow at a smaller scale. I started a pot where I put a bunch of, spinach that came up, and it's right on my back deck. I cut it with the scissors. I put a few sunflower seeds in the middle, so now I've got the sunflowers coming up. If we have time, I can go up at the end here and show you that. I also, you know, like lettuces, you can grow tomato. You just want to make sure it's in a big enough pot. Just about anything you can grow on your balcony. You just have to check the soil, and when you water, really dig down and make sure that the moisture is going all the way down into the plant, and that you're watering around the edges so you're getting all the corners, because things do get drier when they're in containers. And again, I try to give some examples of succession planting and layering, because that applies really well when you're in a balcony setting growing a bunch of different things. And you can plant seeds, small amounts at different times too, so that you get multiple harvests, especially for things like the lettuces, and then you can, you know, when something like Swiss chard or some of the greens, when they start to flower and they want to bolt and be done, you can keep pinching it off and get a little more growth out of the leaves. So the last thing I'll show, and then we can open up for some more questions here, is some of my favorite books. So there's somebody who learned, this fellow John Jevons, who learned a lot about French biointensive gardening, and this was the second book he made. We can provide a list after too. The Sustainable Vegetable Garden, and they're really of the mindset that you don't want to nobody's here, it's rototilling, but you don't want to have to disrupt your soil. It has a structure to it that works for the plants. You want to give it soil amendment or compost that helps to add organic matter to the soil. You want to loosen it, but not necessarily turn everything over all the time. And then you have like a lazy garden style, right? You do all the work up front and then you let the vegetables grow. He's really into calorie crops and what's sustainable long term. So this is their first book where they get into details about how much you can grow in certain square footages. The other one that's on the side of soil is called Teeming with Microbes. And these folks decided they were they were rototillers and put the fertilizer in and do all the things. And they switched up their method after understanding soil and how the microbes work better and had a lot more success and vibrancy in their garden. Lots of info out there about keeping chickens, as much online as you could find in a book. This does have a political tie-in, as Belinda mentioned, right? Growing food locally has its place. This is a local book by Peter Ladner, who is local in the Lower Mainland. And then pests, again, always look them up, try to figure out what's going on. There's some great listservs and groups to be able to post pictures and say, I have this, what do you think? There's also online resources and books for trying to figure what's going on when you have that funny little critter you're not sure about. Questions and thoughts?
I have a question about trimming. What do you usually do when, say, you're trying to trim and thin plants?
What types of plants?
Let's say the lettuces and the greens.
Right. Good question. For the lettuce in the cold frame, for example, those were intended to be just for salad greens and cutting. So I'll just use scissors and just trim continually until not as much is coming up. If I catch things when they're small, like something like collards or lettuce that's supposed to come up and be a bigger head, I'll space them out initially a little more, or I'll get them when when the true leaves come out, right? When a seedling just starts, it gets these little round leaves. And then the next set are the real ones when there's maybe 3 or 4 sets of those leaves. And, it's as big as a little start you would get at a garden center. I'll actually pull them up, dig the roots out, keep the roots protected in some soil, and go ahead and move them from there.
How do you protect the roots and such when you're transplanting? Mostly because I've had a lot of failed transplants.
Yeah. I definitely try to pick up enough soil around it so that I'm not disrupting the roots too much. And then from there, move it, have the soil already set up in the pot, and then have it already fairly moist, right? Like I'm going to just sprinkle water on as opposed to like having the hose fully on it, and then protect it a little bit, right? When you grow things inside, especially in transplant, there's this whole idea of hardening off, where you bring something out on a warmer day and you let it come out for a while and you put it in for one more night, or, have at least throw, a clear, some kind of cover on it at night to protect it a little bit. So like for this, for example, these are starts that I moved them when they were pretty small. They looked really sad for a while. I left them in the corner of the garden, and now they've got a good root base. And when somebody goes to transplant them next into the garden, it should work fairly well. Other questions?
We're going to do a last call for questions from everyone before we switch over to the kitchen.
Sure. And again, it's one of those things where if you're newer to it, it's just about continuing to experiment and chat with people and take it on a bit at a time, right? The knowledge, like anything, the knowledge just accumulates as you go. So hopefully that was helpful. It looked like most people are growing, have some gardening experience. So I hope this was helpful. In the winter, I will let some things stay in the cold frame, but they go dormant. I can pick a few leaves of things, but I don't grow a lot in the winter. I would need to alter the environment a little bit more. I do try to, when I have a lot of greens, I'll try to blanch them and, like put them in hot water for a minute and then freeze them. I do some canning and some canning and some preservation, not a ton, but a little bit, and I want to do more over time. Saw a question come in about avocado. Avocado actually came up on a work call recently with people in Southern California. Apparently they're pretty hard to grow and get a lot of productivity from them. I'm not sure if you can grow them in this environment. Belinda, do you know?
I haven't seen anyone try to grow avocados up here before. Lots of people with cold frames and hot peppers and things like that.
Yes.
But I don't know if we actually get enough sun.
Yeah, I think you might need a little more soil temperature than we have. Great. Well, I'll pass it over to you then, Belinda. Oh, and are folks interested, just maybe to put hands up in the participant list in picking up tomato starts? I've got a couple different kinds of cherry tomatoes and one other one that's kind of the size of Aroma, and I'm happy to share because I do have, again, I had a very enthusiastic start to the spring. I don't see hands, but if you are, mention it in the chat and then we can coordinate. I'll work with Belinda. We can coordinate the follow-up. Does that sound good? Oh, I see one other thing coming up here. Okay. All right. I think we're set then, hey? Oh, I see one more about the seed. Yeah, you can get an avocado started. You can put a toothpicks on all four sides and put it in the water. I did it with my mom when I was little, and it will start to grow, but getting it to go beyond and outside and be productive, I don't think we quite have a warm enough climate here, at least in the lower mainland and BC.
All right, thank you so much, Tamara. And we're going to switch back over here inside.
To what to do with them. All right, thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Now that we're in the kitchen, I'm going to show a few different ways that we can preserve our vegetables through pickling. Now, there are different ways to pickle. So there is one way which is using vinegar, and then another way which is through fermentation. So I'll give an example of each. I'm going to switch us over to the counter camera where you can see my ingredients. I have with me carrots, stems from Swiss chard. So if you have a lot of Swiss chard, don't throw it out. In terms of the stems, you can use them for cooking or you can pickle them. They're kind of like celery. They're quite crunchy. I like them. And then over here we have cabbage. We're going to start off with the easy pickles, or at least easy in my opinion, which are vinegar pickles. And all of what I'm showing you right now is for pickles that you would store in the refrigerator, and it's not a canning process. So if you want to do any of this with canning, you just have to make sure that everything is sterile, and you can do that by putting things into the dishwasher to sterilize them and dry them and making sure all your tools are sterile. But in this case, I just have everything that's clean, and I'm going to be storing this in the fridge for maybe a few weeks. For the Swiss chard stems here, I'm going to do a vinegar pickle. I'm going to just, for reference, put the ratios here. So for quick pickles, these would be ready in a few days, and they are based on a brine that's made of equal parts water and vinegar, as well as some salt and sugar. The sugar is optional. Some people don't like it, and that's completely fine. And the nice thing about the ratio, it's 1, 1, 1, 1. So 1 cup of water to 1 cup of vinegar to 1 tablespoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of sugar. While Tamara was speaking, I boiled this vinegar, water, salt, and sugar mixture in a pot, and make sure you use something that's non-reactive, so something that's stainless steel. If you use something, say, like aluminum, then the vinegar might cause some stains. Now from here, It's quite simple. Stuff your pieces of washed vegetables. And this is not just for Swiss chard. You can do this with just about any vegetable. In. I might need to do 2 jars. Okay, and then we're just going to pour this brine in like so. Now this is still very warm. We're going to put a lid on it. And then we're just going to let this cool off to room temperature before moving it into the fridge. And then after 4 to 5 days, depending on how fresh you like your pickles to be or how sour you like them to be, they're ready to eat. So they're very, very, very quick. But these types of pickles are not fermented, so you don't have the beneficial bacteria. However, they're still quite good. And if you store them in the fridge, you can store them for months. So that is one way to make pickles. The next way I'm going to show is for crunchy vegetables such as carrots. These are fermented pickles. The way that fermented pickles work is that you have natural bacteria. So this is the lactobacillus that's similar to the bacteria you find in sourdough bread, that you find in yogurts and cultured dairy products. They are very good for your gut, and they also tend to survive in the types of environments that other bacteria don't survive in. So they survive in salt environments, whereas a lot of other harmful bacteria do not. So that's why you use a brine using salt and water. And also you can put some pickling spice in there. And that's one thing I didn't mention for the vinegar pickles. If you'd like, you can add any other types of flavoring to that vinegar mixture. What I showed there was just something basic, but you can use a lot of different things. Now for these carrots, I've got a clean jar, and then I have an already made up mixture of the water with the salt and some pickling spice, and I also threw some mustard seeds in there just because I like that type of flavor. I'm gonna put all these carrots in here. And then I'm going to fill this up. Now it's very important to make sure that you have enough coverage of your water so that it goes above the carrots. So here, I actually don't have quite enough. So I'm actually just going to quickly make up a little bit more salt water. And the water that I use is dechlorinated. Now that sounds kind of fancy, but really it's just letting water sit out for at least a day or so that all the chlorine evaporates. It's similar to making sourdough bread. You want to make sure that the water does not have chlorine in it because that interferes with the fermentation process. So you do really want to make sure that it's been dechlorinated. Let's give this a stir. So that's all it takes to make the brine water, is just dissolving salt into water in that ratio that you see there. I'm gonna just top this up. Now with carrots, they're pretty good at staying submerged. You see the carrots here, they're not going anywhere. With some other vegetables, you might find that they start to float, and you don't want that to happen. And so what you want to do is you want to weigh it down. And one trick I use for weighing everything down is I just fill a jar that's smaller and can fit into the big jar with water, and then throw it in like this, like so, and then that way it keeps everything submerged. Now for the first few days of fermentation, you want to just leave it like this, and I tend to cover it with just like a cheesecloth or any other cloth and an elastic band, because there are going to be gases and bubbles and things like that form. So I'm going to just leave this here for a few days, and you will start seeing some activity. You're going to start seeing some bubbles, and after a few days, that's when it's ready to transfer into the fridge. So you can take the weight off of it, put a screw cap on, and then leave it in the fridge and let it sit there, say, for another week or two, depending on your taste of like how fermented you want it to be. And then you can eat that until it's done. There is a question here about boiling the water for the fermentation. So that's one way actually you can dechlorinate your water if you don't want to leave your water out and let it sit for say 24 to 48 hours. You can just boil the water, and that does help with getting rid of the chlorine, and then just let it cool and then add the salt, and you can continue just like the rest of the process. There are probiotics in the pickles if you ferment it this way. So if you make these fermented pickles, then you will have the lactobacillus that is in it. All right, I'm going to switch back to the counter cam and show the last type of pickles, which I guess it's more like sauerkraut, but it is a form of pickling. Now the method for cabbage is a little different than the crunchier vegetables, and this is where you get to have a little bit of fun with massaging your cabbage. What I have here is some cabbage that I have sprinkled with salt and just tossed lightly about an hour ago. The reason for leaving it for a while is you want the juices from the cabbage to come out using the salt. Once it's sat for a bit, you can see this cabbage is starting to look a little wilted and the water's coming out. Then you're going to knead it. So you're going to massage this cabbage, and you can already see this liquid that is forming. So we're going to just knead this like we're kneading bread and squeeze this out as much as we can. And I do really like using purple cabbage because, first of all, there's not as much purple cabbage sauerkraut that you can buy out there, and it's a great color. Okay. And then I'm going to take this, put it into the jar, so. And then pour the juice on top. And just really pack it in, making sure that it's submerged. Now again, if you find that the level of the water is a little bit low and there's not quite enough, you can top it up with some more brine. I'll just use some of that brine that I made before. Okay. And then similar to the other one, if you want to make sure you really weigh everything down, you can just drop another jar inside and then cover it up. And leave it for another few days. Now, if you want some other ideas or options for how to weigh down your vegetables, there are what they call pickle weights. And those pickle weights, they really are just like discs that people use to weigh down their cucumbers, their beans, their cabbage, or what have you, to make sure that they are submerged when they are fermenting. Another fairly low cost way to do it is just to fill a clean plastic bag with water and stuff it into your jar in the same way. Other people also would use other vegetables. So sometimes for pickling cabbage, you leave one piece of cabbage uncut and you stuff that piece of cabbage on top of everything else like a cap and push it down. So there's multiple ways that you can do it. What I showed here is, I would say, the basic, without any special tools way of pickling, but you might find if you're looking online that some people have these systems like airlock systems where they have a little tube to take things out. All of those are possible. Also, if you do want to pickle these for longer term storage, that is possible. The extra step that you would need is once the initial fermentation stage has gone through, so that's the first few days when things are really starting to gas and bubble and that type of stuff, then you can transfer that mixture into a sterilized jar, cap it off, and then leave it for a longer period of time. There are also some pickle recipes where you do that from the get-go. So you actually put everything into a sterilized jar and cap it off and seal it really tight, and then that's it. So there are lots and lots of different ways that you can make pickles. This is just the few ways that I know of that I find to be the simplest and the easiest to do without many special tools. But the internet has lots of ways that you can preserve your different vegetables. Are there any questions related to pickles from anyone? I think I answered the two that are in the chat. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, then that concludes our last workshop of the series. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. Thank you to Tamara for hosting us in her garden. And I hope that all of you would be able to try some of these things at home. Thank you and have a great day.